On a dark and stormy night, the demon lord summoned his generals in a meeting. Almandra, the wielder of flames, Sylphid, the summoner of storms, and Genome, the knight of barriers. Then came the curveball. Uchimura, general on the list, wasn't anything like the others. Uchimura's life before this demonic detour was as ordinary as it gets. Fresh out of university, he entered the corporate world full of hope and ambition, only to realize that his job was less about climbing the ladder and more about being the rug people stepped on. His boss viewed him as little more than deadweight. To test Uchimura's spirit, his boss shipped him overseas to manage a factory construction project. Against all odds, Uchimura succeeded, proving that even underqualified deadweight can accomplish something if left completely unsupervised. Just as he started to feel a shred of pride, his boss called again with the corporate equivalent of a slap in the face, another impossible project in another country. Exhausted and questioning his life choices, Uchimura wandered the streets in a haze, wondering if all this effort was worth it. That's when a bike hit that sent him flying, not to the hospital, but to a demon lord's throne room. He woke up to the sight of the demon lord, who looked like he'd just stepped out of a metal album cover. The demon lord didn't waste time with chit-chats. He offered Uchimura a job, become one of his 4 generals. A director-level salary, a personal office, and, best of all, no unpaid overtime. The offer sounded absurd. Uchimura was an ordinary man with no combat skills, magical abilities, or heroic traits to speak of. The demon lord, however, had done his homework. He praised Uchimura's work ethic, resilience, and ability to achieve results despite overwhelming odds. Despite the tempting perks, Uchimura was hesitant. The idea of joining a demonic army didn't sit well with him, and he wasn't sure if he was cut out for the role. Sensing his reluctance, the demon lord reassured him. If Uchimura declined, he would be safely returned to his world. It was the first time in Uchimura's life that someone acknowledged his efforts, and the validation was almost enough to make him forget he was being recruited by evil incarnate. The other generals weren't exactly thrilled about the new recruit. Almandra, in particular. She saw Uchimura as nothing more than a fragile, powerless human, which, to be fair, was accurate. To prove her point, she launched a full power attack at him, knocking him unconscious before he even had a chance to react. The demon lord stopped Almandra and used the incident to make a point. Uchimura wasn't chosen for his physical strength or magical abilities. Instead, he was chosen for his intelligence and strategic thinking, qualities the other generals lacked. When Uchimura regained consciousness, he was understandably terrified. Begging for his life, he tried to explain that he wasn't cut out for this kind of work. The demon lord, however, reassured him. He wasn't here to fight, he was here to think. The demon lord's current objective was to form alliances with neighboring races. Unfortunately, the previous negotiators had failed to make any progress due to their lack of diplomatic skills. His first assignment as a general would be to secure the allegiance of the Minotaurs, a race known for their stubbornness and strength. To make matters worse, Almandra was assigned as his guide. This arrangement was less than ideal for Uchimura, considering Almandra had just tried to kill him. As they made their way to the Minotaur's territory, Uchimura couldn't shake the feeling that his new job might be even more stressful than his old one. He also realized that this was a chance to prove himself in a way he never could back in Japan. He couldn't decide if this was an upgrade or just a different kind of nightmare. As they approached the Minotaur's chambers, Uchimura braced himself for the challenge ahead. This might be his chance to prove, once and for all, that he wasn't the useless deadweight. Sure, the stakes were a little higher. Failing here didn't mean a bad performance review, it meant death, but at least he wouldn't die wondering if he could have done more. Uchimura and Almandra walked side by side, though the fiery general's impatience was evident in every step. She threatened to accidentally incinerate him if he slowed her down. Uchimura, feeling like he was being dragged to his own execution, tried to keep up with her brisk pace. He couldn't blame her skepticism, after all, he was just an ordinary office worker. Still, the demon lord's confidence in him lingered in his mind. As they approached Lord Terius's quarters, Uchimura's confidence began to waver. Almandra, noticing his hesitation, smirked knowingly and dared him to open them. For he could reconsider, Almandra shoved the doors open with a dramatic flair. The sight inside froze Uchimura in his tracks. Lord Terius, the Minotaur chief, was an imposing figure, towering, muscular, and radiating an aura of menace. Uchimura's brain briefly entertained a vivid image of himself being stomped into a Uchimura-shaped rug. Almandra stepped forward with unshakable confidence, declaring she would handle the negotiations. Her approach started politely enough, but things quickly spiraled out of control. Before long, what should have been a diplomatic conversation had turned into a shouting match. Uchimura watched in horror as Almandra's temper flared, leading to their abrupt discharge from the chamber. Outside, Almandra gasped in frustration and blamed Terius's stubbornness for the failed negotiations. She assured Uchimura that she had been close to sealing the deal, but the chief's stubbornness made it impossible. Uchimura wasn't convinced but chose to keep his thoughts to himself. As she stormed off, leaving him to figure out the situation alone, he wondered how he could salvage the mess she'd left behind. That evening, Uchimura found himself drinking at a dingy tavern, trying to gather his thoughts. The image of the massive minotaur still loomed in his mind, but it also reminded him of a difficult client from his past job. Back then, his persistence and strategy had won the day. Drawing strength from that memory, he resolved to try again. With a new plan forming, he finished his drink and returned to Lord Terius's chambers. Meanwhile, Almandra decided to report Uchimura's presumed failure to the Demon Lord. She painted a grim picture of his incompetence, expecting the Demon Lord to share her doubts. However, the Demon Lord encouraged patience. Frustrated, Almandra returned to the Minotaur chief's quarters, determined to see Uchimura fail with her own eyes. What she found upon her arrival left her baffled. Uchimura was calmly stuffing a sack full of hay. He explained that the hay was part of his strategy. She warned him that Terius was impossible to negotiate with, but Uchimura remained confident. He explained that successful negotiation wasn't about overpowering someone but about understanding them. With that, he walked into the chamber, sack of hay in hand, leaving Almandra in disbelief. The next morning, Almandra rushed to Lord Terius's chambers, expecting to find Uchimura's failure. Instead, she found the chamber empty, save for scattered hay. Assuming the worst, she was about to leave when Uchimura appeared. He informed her that Lord Terius was currently with the Demon Lord, finalizing their alliance. Almandra was stunned. Uchimura explained that the key to winning over Terius was understanding his perspective. The hay, which Almandra had mocked, was a symbolic gesture. Minotaurs valued respect, and the offering had opened the door to meaningful dialogue. Terius had been testing their patience all along, provoking Almandra to measure her peace. Her repeated outbursts had only confirmed his doubts about her capabilities. By approaching him with respect and focusing on shared goals, Uchimura had been able to secure the alliance. Almandra was left speechless. For once, her sharp tongue failed her as she processed the reality of Uchimura's success. Moments later, Lord Terius himself appeared. He offered Uchimura a handshake and an apology for his earlier behavior, acknowledging his wisdom and patience. The alliance was officially secured. The Demon Lord, clearly pleased, presented him with a golden bracelet as a symbol of his new role as international liaison. Almandra, though still skeptical, had to admit that Uchimura had accomplished something she couldn't. As they prepared for their next mission, Uchimura felt a strange sense of belonging. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just another faceless employee lost in the grind. He was valued, respected, and even admired. Sure, his new workplace was a literal hellscape, but the benefits were better than anything he'd ever had. Uchimura is still adjusting to his new role as a demon general. He got his own office now, which is an upgrade, but despite the small perks, it's still overwhelming. He's still not quite used to the whole situation and feels like he's in way over his head. Since he's now an official general, Uchimura feels like he should at least introduce himself to his colleagues. So, he heads over to Sylphid's quarters, hoping to meet her and make a good impression. When he knocks on her door, he's greeted by a young woman who seems way too busy to deal with him. She tells him that Sylphid is buoy and can't be disturbed, leaving Uchimura a little disappointed but not surprised. It's like walking all the way to the break room for a snack, only to find it's out of order. Not exactly a warm welcome to the team. Uchimura decides to try again later, but just as he turns to leave, Almandra rushes up to him with urgent news. There's an important task from the Demon Lord, and Uchimura needs to head over immediately. Uchimura heads to the Demon Lord's place, wondering what kind of mess he's walking into. The Demon Lord briefs him about a crucial negotiation with the Ogre tribe, a group of demi-humans. They're strong, and if they decide to become enemies, it could be a huge problem. The Demon Lord needs Uchimura to secure a peaceful agreement with them. The Demon Lord gives him full authority to handle the situation, which feels like both an honor and a curse. Uchimura is not exactly thrilled about going into potentially dangerous territory alone, but it's his job now. Almandra offers to escort him, but there's one problem: she doesn't get along with Genome, the head of the demi-human division. Almandra and Genome have bad history and neither of them is willing to compromise. Uchimura decides to go find Genome and try to get some answers. When Uchimura finds Genome, she's busy overseeing her troops. He's impressed by the sheer strength and morale of her soldiers. They're disciplined and clearly well trained. After the training ends, Uchimura asks Genome about the Ogre tribe, hoping for some useful advice. Genome admits she doesn't know much about them but warns him about their leader. Ogre's infamously difficult and stubborn, making negotiations nearly impossible. It's not the most helpful information, but it's something. Genome also refuses to work and he has to figure out how to handle the situation on his own. Things take a turn when Almandra shows up behind Uchimura, and it's clear that she's not happy to see Genome. The two immediately start arguing, and Uchimura is left standing there, feeling like he's in the middle of an awkward family feud. Almandra says she's just concerned for Uchimura's safety. Uchimura and Almandra make their way to the Ogre Castle. They're stopped at the gate and told to wait for Ogre's permission to enter. Almandra is furious, calling it an insult, but Uchimura recognizes it for what it is, a power move. Ogre is trying to unsettle them, to throw them off balance. Uchimura keeps his cool and urges Almandra to be patient, even though it's clear she's barely holding it together. After a long wait, they're finally allowed inside. Uchimura can't help but notice that Ogre's armor is in a terrible state. It's clearly falling apart, which is a strange look for someone who's supposed to be a powerful leader. Inside the throne room, things go from bad to worse. Ogre greets them with nothing but hostility and makes it clear that he's not interested in negotiating unless they're willing to either surrender or assassinate the demon lord. Almandra is ready to lose it, but Uchimura steps in and holds her back. It's clear that Ogre is just trying to provoke them, to get them to make a mistake that he can use against them later. Uchimura suggests they step outside for a quick chat, away from the tension in the throne room. Once they're outside, Almandra lets her frustration spill out. She's ready to fight, but Uchimura calms her down. He explains that Ogre's strategy is to make them look bad, so that he can blame them for the failure of the negotiations. Almandra, though still furious, understands the plan and agrees to keep her cool. Just when it seems like all hope is lost, Ogre's daughter, Orl, shows up with a surprising request. She apologizes for the interruption and asks for their help in deposing her father. It turns out that Ogre's tribe is facing severe financial struggles, despite their reputation for strength. And Orl's plan is to overthrow her father in order to fix the situation. Suddenly, Uchimura's mission takes a huge turn. It's a whole new mess, and Uchimura is stuck in the middle of it. Uchimura had suspected as much the moment he stepped into the castle. It felt like walking into a company that was trying to keep up appearances, but was on the brink of bankruptcy. The walls were barely holding up, the equipment looked like it had been scavenged from a yard sale, and the entire place screamed failure. Orl, the daughter of the tribe's leader, quickly made it clear that their only hope was the demon army. Her father was ill and refusing to cooperate. His health was a well-kept secret, which seemed like a terrible business strategy. Orl was convinced that the demon army was their salvation, but her father wouldn't budge. While the tribe's leaders tiptoed around the truth, Uchimura was left to navigate the mess. Orl eventually trusted him enough to reveal that her father's health was rapidly declining, but Uchimura cautioned against spreading such sensitive information too freely. After all, nothing says trustworthy like telling someone you've just met about your father's impending death. But Orl, with all the confidence, insisted she knew better and fully trusted him. Then, just when Uchimura thought he had seen it all, Orl did something truly unexpected. She proposed marriage to him. It was like a business deal, but with more demons and less paperwork. Naturally, Uchimura was taken aback. He wasn't exactly the marrying type, especially not after the chaotic ride his life had become. Almandra, his assistant and occasional rival, she immediately intervened, preventing Uchimura from making any rash decisions. Later, Uchimura sat in his office, processing his bizarre day. He had a stalled negotiation, an unexpected marriage proposal, and an entire tribe teetering on the edge of collapse. If there was ever a time to question his life choices, it was now. So, Uchimura retreated into his mental bar, where his imaginary Almandra was having a very heated debate with a bartender about whether gorillas or lions were cooler. Almandra, in one of her rare moments of passion, argued that lions were better because they had pride. Uchimura, still unsure that this had to do with anything, had a sudden epiphany. He could use Ogre's pride against him. The next morning, Uchimura called Almandra into his office. He had come up with a new strategy. Instead of targeting the larger tribes, they'd focus on the smaller ones. They were struggling for resources and might be more open to the demon army's offer of aid. Almandra wasn't convinced, but Uchimura explained that this was a tactic he used back on Earth: secure the smaller clients first, and the larger ones would follow. If the surrounding demi-human tribes joined the demon army, Ogre's pride wouldn't allow him to remain isolated. It was the perfect plan. A week later, as expected, Ogre summoned them, and when he learned of the smaller tribes' alliances, he was furious. Uchimura, ever the smooth talker, feigned innocence and claimed he'd just been offering aid to struggling tribes. This only made Ogre angrier, but it worked to Uchimura's advantage. Uchimura then revealed Orl's involvement, and Ogre, shocked by his daughter's betrayal, listened as she explained that the alliance was the only way to save the tribe. She pointed out her father's failing health and urged him to accept the demon army's help. Uchimura saw an opportunity. Instead of pushing for a merger, which would have been a direct hit to Ogre's pride, he proposed an equal partnership. This played right into Ogre's ego, and after some thought, Ogre agreed to consider the offer. Uchimura knew this was his moment. If he could appeal to Ogre's pride, the deal would be done. A few days later, Almandra excitedly informed Uchimura that Ogre had accepted the deal. Uchimura was now preoccupied with an entirely new issue: he needed a personal assistant. While Almandra had been his right-hand woman, Uchimura realized he needed someone else. But before he could make things any worse, there was a knock at the door. It was Orl offering her services as a representative of the Ogre tribe. She was grateful for Uchimura's help and wanted to show her appreciation by assisting him in any way possible. Uchimura, still flustered from the previous conversation, offered her the position of personal assistant. Orl eagerly accepted, and Almandra, who had been quietly seething in the corner, now saw Orl as a rival. Despite the drama, Uchimura reflected on his recent success. The demon army was growing stronger, but with that came new risks. More allies meant more enemies, and the political landscape was becoming more volatile by the day. Uchimura knew they couldn't let their guard down. A few days passed, and Uchimura was drowning in paperwork. Just as he was about to start contemplating the meaning of life, Orl burst into his office with news. She had successfully negotiated with the Bear tribe, and as long as Uchimura met their conditions, they would support the demon army. She also informed him that he was about to receive some kind of commendation for his efforts. Knowing the demon lord's usual flair for the dramatic, Uchimura figured it would either be an extravagant reward or a high-stakes deathmatch. Before he could process the impending doom of his recognition ceremony, Almandra walked in carrying lunch. This would have been a welcomed distraction if the food didn't look like something straight out of a prison cafeteria. The demon army's rations were flavorless, and Uchimura was convinced it was a new form of torture. He had accepted a lot of things about this world, but a life without decent food was where he drew the line. Almandra had an idea: if he wanted meat, he should go get it himself. Uchimura wasn't thrilled about the idea of running around in the wilderness just to satisfy his cravings, but Almandra had an ulterior motive. The neighboring demi-human tribes had requested help dealing with a magical creature that had been attacking their people in the forest. So, in classic demon army fashion, their food hunt doubled as a murder mission. Just what Uchimura needed, another near-death experience disguised as a casual outing. Following a suspiciously convenient trail of mushrooms, Almandra deduced that their target had to be nearby. Apparently, all the orcs who had been attacked were gathering these mushrooms when they were ambushed. It didn't take long before a massive boar, angry and faster than Uchimura's will to live, came charging at them. Almandra, clearly excited for some action, launched herself into the air and drop-kicked the boar straight into the ground. Uchimura started to think this might actually be easy until the boar retaliated by flinging a barrage of rocks at them. Almandra dodged effortlessly. Uchimura barely had time to scream before Almandra stopped it with one hand. At this point, she could have ended it in a single punch, but she hesitated. Killing it outright would ruin the meat, and considering how desperate they were for food, she wasn't about to waste a meal. So instead, she opted for a less messy method, snapping its neck like a twig. With the boar now lifeless, Almandra proudly declared that Uchimura could finally have his precious meat. Somehow he wasn't hungry anymore. They dragged the corpse back to the orc village, where the locals greeted them like heroes. Uchimura thought this would be the end of their adventure, but then Almandra made an announcement that she was going to cook the meat herself. Uchimura, being the unfortunate soul that he was, had to witness firsthand what could only be described as a war crime against food. Almandra's idea of cooking was blasting the boar with a fireball until it was charred beyond recognition. She proudly handed a chunk to Uchimura, who stared at it as if it had personally insulted him. Almandra insisted it tasted better than it looked. The moment it hit his tongue, he knew he had made a terrible mistake. It was like chewing molten rubber coated in ash. If this was what demons considered fine dining, he now understood why they were always so angry. After barely surviving what he could only describe as culinary warfare, Uchimura put his foot down. From now on, he would be in charge of cooking. Almandra challenged him to do better. And so, he did. Using actual cooking techniques, soaking the meat, slow roasting it, and even making a proper soup, he prepared a dish that didn't taste like burnt despair. The villagers were amazed. Almandra, after reluctantly taking a bite, had to admit it was good. Uchimura took this opportunity to teach them a valuable lesson. The demon army wasn't just struggling with resources, they were also stuck in a primitive mindset. Food was a crucial part of a civilization's progress. If they wanted to be a powerful force, they needed to start with the basics, learning to cook something that wouldn't poison their own troops. It sounded harsh, but Almandra had to admit he had a point. The demon army was strong, but they lacked development. And if they wanted to truly compete with neighboring nations, they had to evolve. Almandra decided it was time to head back to the castle. Uchimura, still traumatized by everything that had happened, was not excited about traveling at night. But Almandra assured him that she could light the way with her magic, a blazing fireball guiding their way. It also made sense why demi-humans, who couldn't wield magic, trained tirelessly to become skilled fighters, while demons like Almandra could rely completely on their magic. But he believed Almandra would benefit by improving her combat techniques a little. Despite her attack power increasing dramatically when she used her true power to transform, her recovery period afterwards was lengthy. He suggested she take a weapon into combat with her next time. He also advised that she should wear armor that offered greater coverage. After he made that statement, Almandra considered it as an insult, her light extinguished. She abandoned Uchimura in the woods, leaving him wondering why she had become so angry. He ran back to the orc village for shelter. The following morning, Uchimura met with the demon lord to provide a report on the mission, and the demon lord congratulated him on his accomplishments. He was informed that Almandra had returned the previous evening, while Uchimura only arrived this morning, escorted by the orcs. So, he was asked whether some dispute had occurred between him and Almandra. Uchimura broke down and proclaimed himself unworthy of being a general. The demon lord advised him to calm down and explain what happened. Uchimura told him everything. The demon lord could see that Uchimura had accidentally offended Almandra, but it was crucial to mend this rift for the good of the demon army. So, he formally ordered Uchimura to find a way to reconcile with Almandra. That was easier said than done. He recalled the pride Almandra had expressed when stating that demons were the only ones capable of magic, but there had to be more to it. So, he began reading a demon history book, hoping to understand. He soon discovered a chapter detailing that a toned physique was necessary for a demon's magical capability, which is why demons took great pride in their figures and often wore skimpy clothing. Uchimura now understood the root of Almandra's upset by suggesting that she be more efficient with more coverage. He had essentially rejected her demon pride. However, he had no idea how to rebuild their relationship. Meanwhile, at the castle, Oral, having finished chopping wood for the day, was about to begin her next task when she was horrified to see Almandra, incredibly upset over her argument with Uchimura. When she saw Oral, she cried to her, claiming that Uchimura disliked her and refused to praise her physique. Oral was initially bewildered, but after Almandra explained events, she understood the potential misunderstanding. She explained that as a human, Uchimura's values were significantly different from theirs. Uchimura didn't believe that displaying your body was something good, but Almandra couldn't believe it. Oral explained that Uchimura most likely considered Almandra to be an exhibitionist, which was why he had never questioned it. Almandra suddenly realized that if Uchimura was uneasy with her exposed body, then all those affectionate gestures she'd made towards him were probably interpreted as some sort of deviant behavior. She was embarrassed. Oral begged her to stop as the floor couldn't endure much more of this. Almandra asked Oral for advice. Oral told her of a discussion she'd had with him when she first became his assistant. He had told Oral that he wanted her to remain true to her desires, no matter what, because he wanted her to be free to speak about any concerns she had so they could reach a mutual agreement, regardless of any misinterpretations. Oral was confident Almandra could mend things with Uchimura as long as they talked things through. Uchimura and Almandra met in a castle stairwell, both with urgent things to express. Almandra proclaimed to Uchimura that she wasn't a slut, she simply wanted him to compliment her body. Uchimura said that he thought her body was hot. They both took a moment to think about the other's words, and as it seemed they were on the same page, Uchimura apologized to Almandra. He hadn't known much about demons and hadn't realized that what he had said would be considered insulting to her. Almandra accepted his apology and similarly apologized to Uchimura because it was not his fault that he was ignorant of demon culture, and even if she was angry, she shouldn't have abandoned him in the forest. Uchimura almost died due to her actions. As he was fine, Uchimura declared his forgiveness. He was happy to have made amends, and now that they had had a chance to learn a little about each other, Uchimura thought they could become great associates, though he still did not realize that Almandra interpreted the word associate as a marriage proposition. Later, the demon lord gathered his subordinates as he had a special announcement. After forming alliances with the various tribes, his demon army had become significantly stronger, and this was all due to the dedicated work of his newest general, Uchimura. The demon lord would present him with a magic stone. Uchimura felt honored to receive such a valuable stone. None of it would have been possible without Almandra at his side. He went over to her, kneeled down, and asked Almandra to accept the stone with him. Almandra was happy but panicked that Uchimura was doing this in public, with so many witnesses. He was unaware that gifting a magic stone to a girl was literally the equivalent of a marriage proposal in this realm. And the only reason she didn't accept immediately was because she was embarrassed in front of everyone. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you don't miss the next episode. See you next time.